My name is Ian Baker, and I had the great privilege of being able to be the primary curator for the Tibet Secret Temple exhibition, which introduced concepts of body, mind, and meditation within Tantric Buddhism. Tantra etymologically derives from a word meaning to extend and to stretch. So essentially the Buddhist Tantras, which were a set of texts that appeared in India between the 6th and the 10th century, were methodologies, practices, as well as sort of a philosophical view that differed quite distinctly from earlier forms of Tibetan monasticism. And they were ways of bringing about methods that included sensuality, the senses, in a much more dynamic way on the spiritual path. The British Museum has one of the most extraordinary collections of Asian art anywhere in the world, so we were very fortunate for the Tibet Secret Temple exhibition to be able to borrow several objects that help to contextualize and also to illustrate and expand on the themes and content of the exhibition. Many of the objects that we see in Tibetan art are in what is called yabyum, which is literally a conjoined sexual embrace that symbolizes not just the unity of sensuality on the spiritual path, as is commonly seen, but more importantly and esoterically, it's the union of opposites in a kind of Jungian sense, if you will. Also, in Tibetan art, not only do we see figures in entwined sexual union, but we also see them manifesting very fiercely and wrathfully. So generally the purpose of these wrathful tantric deities is to cut through the conceptual mind. So in the image that we see here of Imma, this is an image of the Tibetan Lord of Death, and we see him riding on top of a bull. We see him manifesting in a very, what would in a traditional context have been a quite frightening form. But this is all about engaging, you could say, the shadows of consciousness. We see wrathful figures in Tibetan art, not just in the masculine form, such as we saw with Imma, but we also see them in these feminine aspects as these wrathful goddesses. So the Sarva Dakini that we see here, pictured in this black and wrathful form, trampling on a prostrate figure representing the ego or the social self. And in her left hand she's holding an upturned skull cup brimming with blood. So with this rather dynamic image of literally a goddess coming at you and who you invite to essentially dismember you in a shamanic ritual, is really an integration that we see in Tibetan Buddhism between indigenous shamanic forms with a Buddhist view of emptiness. The path of Tantra is about really engaging not just our mortality, but these deep subconscious forces. And so that's dramatized sometimes in ritual practices in which the practitioner, in this case a tantric master or lama, would use a bone apron, such as we see here, where human bones have been carved, often with dancing figures on them, with whorls representing the psychic body, the tantric body, meaning the energy body. So what we see here, almost like an exoskeleton, is the psychic body, the spiritual body, made manifest externally and then used as a ritual adornment in processes of tantric ritual. In Tantric Buddhism, we often see weapons represented in the hands of tantric deities. So what these represent are, of course, not objects to be used in any kind of aggressive way externally, but they are objects that we understand in order to be able to slay, as it were, the social self, the ego that prevents us from awakening to a self-transcendent state of Buddhahood. So in this particular case, we see a ritual dagger, the Vajrakilaya, this particular deity whose lower body is in the form of a three-pronged dagger. So this is used also with wings. So this is used as a support for the transformation of our normal way in which we image and understand ourselves, through essentially a tantric thought experiment, we turn ourselves into a winged deity, and using that one pointedness of the dagger to cut through the kinds of illusions and distractive thoughts and emotions that occlude that reality. So the role of the Garuda, which we see here, this celestial horned eagle, of course it's a mythical bird. We don't see birds with horns, and we don't see birds that are described as they are in the Tibetan poetic tradition as being able, with a single flap of their wings, to cover the distance of the entire universe. So in a certain sense, this mythical Garuda is a symbol of spiritual flight. And there are many, many poems within the esoteric tradition of Dzogchen, or the Great Perfection teachings, in which the mind is equated with the Garuda, being able, in that sense, to cover the universe with a single moment of awareness. What we see here is a rather beautiful and a book cover from the British Museum. We're looking at actually the inside cover, which is painted in great detail. The back side of the book cover is elaborately carved, and this would have been used to keep a set of loose folios of a particular Tantric Buddhist text, all of which would have been block printed. And this is rather an extraordinary tradition in Tibet, which is the function largely of the monasteries to preserve knowledge in this form. I went to Nepal when I was 19 years old in 1977 to study Tibetan Buddhist art. And it was the philosophical richness of the tradition and the depth and dynamism of the iconography that led to a lifetime passion for this subject and for the opportunity to be able to share some of those perspectives in this particular exhibition.